In the misty mountains of western North Carolina stands a house that seems impossible, a vision of ambition, wealth, and artistry brought to life. The Biltmore estate, sprawling across 4 acres of floor space, boasts 250 rooms, 35 bedrooms, 43 bathrooms, 65 fireplaces, and even an indoor swimming pool. When George Washington Vanderbilt II completed this monumental project in 1895, it had taken 6 years of relentless work and cost $6 million, a figure that adjusted for today's currency surpasses $200 million. Since then, no American has dared to attempt anything of comparable scale or audacity. Yet the story of Biltmore is not just one of wealth and architectural triumph. Its existence and the impossibility of its replication reflects a seismic shift in American society. The world that allowed Biltmore to rise was dismantled by public fury at extreme wealth, heavy taxation, and tightening regulation. What followed was not the disappearance of billionaires, but their retreat into invisibility. In 1888, George Vanderbilt was just 26 years old, yet he wielded a fortune larger than the annual budgets of most American states. The youngest grandson of Commodore Cornelius Vanderbilt, George inherited both money and expectation. The Commodore had transformed American transportation, building an empire on steamships and railroads that reshaped the continent. By the time he passed in 1877, his estate exceeded $15 million in gold, a sum greater than the entire U.S. Treasury. The fortune passed primarily to William Henry Vanderbilt, George's father, who doubled it in just 8 years through relentless expansion of the railroad empire. When William died in 1885, his estate, roughly $200 million, was divided among his 8 children. George received approximately $10 million outright, plus substantial trust income, putting him in possession of wealth unimaginable to most. Unlike his flamboyant brothers, who built mansions in Manhattan and Newport and hosted scandalous, fortune-draining costume balls, George was introspective. He loved books more than banquets, art more than ostentation. He spoke 8 languages, collected masterpieces, and traveled Europe to study architecture and landscape design. Shy, contemplative, and uncomfortable with society's performative displays of wealth, he sought something quieter, something enduring. In 1888, George traveled to Asheville, North Carolina, seeking relief for chronic respiratory issues. The town, cradled in the Blue Ridge Mountains, offered crisp mountain air, dramatic vistas, and a climate gentle enough for year-round comfort. The land was inexpensive, the labor abundant, and the forests echoed the grand estates he had admired in Europe. Here, George saw an opportunity, not merely a retreat for health, but a stage for a visionary creation unlike anything in America. By 1889, he had acquired roughly 125,000 acres surrounding Asheville, more land than many eastern cities. The purchase, made possible by local owners still recovering from the devastation of the Civil War, would become the foundation of an estate that married natural beauty with architectural genius. George enlisted the era's greatest talents. Richard Morris Hunt, America's preeminent architect, trained in Paris at the École des Beaux-Arts, was tasked with designing a house worthy of its mountainous surroundings. Hunt's experience, ranging from Fifth Avenue mansions to the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty, ensured grandeur married seamlessly to proportion and elegance. The landscape fell to Frederick Law Olmsted, the visionary behind Central Park, whose genius transformed acres of rugged terrain into rolling gardens, reflecting pools, and forests sculpted into art. Together, they created more than a mansion. They crafted a masterpiece. Biltmore was a dialogue between wealth and taste, ambition and restraint, the natural and the human-made. Every room, every corridor, every vista speaks to George Vanderbilt's quiet determination to leave a legacy measured not in scandal or spectacle, but in enduring beauty. Biltmore is more than the largest private home in America. It is a monument to vision, intellect, and the rare convergence of resources and courage. And yet, it also reminds us of what vanished in its wake, a world where ambition could manifest physically, openly, and boldly, a world that American society would, in time, render impossible to replicate. At 67 years old, Frederick Law Olmsted stood at the pinnacle of his career, celebrated as America's preeminent landscape architect. But the task George Vanderbilt entrusted to him was unlike anything Olmsted had attempted. To transform 125,000 acres of stripped forests and exhausted farmland into a landscape that could rival the grandest estates of Europe. Initially, George's vision was modest. He spoke of a country house where he could retreat from society, immerse himself in books, and pursue intellectual passions. Hunt's first sketches depicted a comfortable, elegant home. Olmsted imagined gardens, orchards, and a working farm. Yet as plans evolved, ambition multiplied. George's requirements grew bolder, a library capable of housing his rapidly expanding collection of thousands of volumes, guest rooms for extended visits, entertainment spaces suitable for occasional social functions, and cutting-edge systems that would make the house both luxurious and technologically advanced. Hunt, inspired by the chateau of France's Loire Valley, reimagined the residence as a 4-story limestone masterpiece with steeply pitched roofs, massive chimneys, and elaborate stone carvings. The French Renaissance Revival style was transplanted to the mountains of North Carolina, marrying grandeur with livability, elegance with formality. Olmsted's vision went even further. Instead of landscaping merely around a house, he planned a managed estate encompassing the entire property. Formal gardens would grace the immediate surroundings. Beyond them, forests would demonstrate scientific forestry techniques, and a model farm would restore depleted soil while producing food, lumber, and income. Biltmore was not simply a home, it was a self-sufficient, living laboratory of modern design and agriculture. Construction began in 1889 with meticulous precision. A private railroad spur delivered limestone quarried in Indiana to the remote site. Craftsmen were brought from across America and Europe. At the peak of activity, more than 1,000 laborers worked simultaneously on the mansion and grounds. Foundations were dug into solid bedrock, steel frames engineered to support walls 4 feet thick. The roof alone covered over an acre. Every system was designed for permanence, as if George intended the house to endure for centuries. George immersed himself completely in the project. Business and politics held no interest. His life revolved entirely around Biltmore. He visited the site daily, consulting with Hunt and Olmsted, refining details from the exact hue of stone to the placement of furniture. The house was designed with specific functions in mind. The ground floor featured public spaces, including a 64-seat banquet hall, a 2-story library, billiard and sitting rooms. The second floor contained family bedrooms and guest suites, while the third floor offered additional rooms and storage. Servants' quarters filled the 4th floor, and the basement housed kitchens, mechanical systems, and an indoor swimming pool. Technology was seamlessly integrated throughout. Electric lights powered by the estate's private generator illuminated every room. Central heating carried steam through miles of pipes. An intercom system allowed instant communication between floors. Elevators transported people and supplies. Many of these innovations would not become standard in American buildings for decades. Simultaneously, Olmsted's landscape work transformed the surrounding mountains. Hundreds of thousands of trees and shrubs, many imported from Europe and Asia, were planted. A 3-mile approach road wound through carefully designed forests, building anticipation before the house revealed itself. Terraced formal gardens descended from the residence, adorned with fountains, statuary, and seasonal plantings. The farm sprawled across thousands of acres, including dairy operations, vegetable gardens, and livestock, creating a self-sustaining ecosystem. By Christmas Eve of 1895, construction had reached a stage that allowed occupancy. 6 years of labor and approximately $6 million, over $200 million in today's currency, had produced a marvel unlike anything in America. Biltmore's 250 rooms spanned 175,000 square feet, including 35 bedrooms, 43 bathrooms, and 65 fireplaces. The banquet hall soared 75 feet to a barrel-vaulted ceiling. The library's shelves stretched 2 stories high. The indoor swimming pool, 70 feet long, gleamed with imported tile. Every corner, every vista, every detail reflected George Vanderbilt's singular ambition to create a home of intellectual refinement, architectural brilliance, and lasting beauty. Biltmore was more than a mansion. It was the embodiment of a dream realized through unparalleled vision, craftsmanship, and the extraordinary collaboration of 2 of America's greatest minds. It was a testament to what one individual could imagine and what extraordinary resources could achieve when ambition, artistry, and intellect converged in perfect harmony. The Biltmore house was more than a residence. It was a museum, a laboratory of taste, and a monument to what private wealth could achieve. When George Vanderbilt finally moved in at the age of 33, he had created the largest private home in American history. Thousands of workers had labored for years under his direction. He had proven that an American could construct a residence to rival European palaces. Yet, in a bitter irony, he had also built something already on the verge of obsolescence. The very world that made Biltmore possible, the unbridled accumulation of private fortune, was about to vanish. On Christmas Eve, 1895, George opened Biltmore to his family for the first time. Snow blanketed the Blue Ridge Mountains, softening the contours of the landscape. The approach road wound for 3 miles through Olmsted's carefully planned forests before revealing the chateau rising elegantly from its hillside terraces. Inside, electric lights illuminated rooms filled with art and furniture collected from across Europe. Fires burned in the banquet hall beneath a 75-foot barrel-vaulted ceiling, casting flickering shadows on walls alive with Renaissance detail. The house was complete, ready for life, but also for admiration.
The numbers alone conveyed its audacity. Biltmore contained 250 rooms across 4 stories, with a full basement. 35 bedrooms accommodated family and guests. 43 bathrooms offered modern plumbing with hot and cold running water. 65 fireplaces supplemented the central heating. Its 175,000 square feet of finished floor space, roughly 4 acres under one roof, made it a private city in miniature. Richard Morris Hunt's design drew inspiration from the chateaux of France's Loire Valley. Indiana limestone formed walls 4 feet thick at the foundation. Slate-covered roofs rose to elaborate chimneys and ornamental spires. Stone carvings adorned the facade, sculpted by European-trained artisans, giving the effect of a French palace mysteriously transplanted to the mountains of North Carolina. Inside, George had created a private museum. The entrance hall soared 3 stories, lit by a massive wrought iron chandelier. The banquet hall seated 64 guests at a single table beneath ceilings painted with medieval motifs. The library rose 2 stories with shelves built for 10,000 volumes, though George's collection already numbered more than 20,000 books in 8 languages. The Winter Garden, a glass-roofed conservatory, brought the outdoors inside. Tropical palms reached toward skylights 3 stories above, surrounding a central fountain, proof that technology could create a perpetual summer even in the mountain winter. Recreation and indulgence followed the same ethos. The basement bowling alley featured imported equipment from Europe, a 70-foot-long indoor swimming pool lined with artisan tile rivaled the finest Turkish baths. The gymnasium offered cutting-edge equipment for physical culture. These were luxuries available only in the finest hotels. George installed them for private enjoyment. Every technological system represented the cutting edge of the 1890s. Electricity, supplied by the estate's private generator, eliminated the need for gas or oil. Steam heated every major room through miles of copper piping. An electric intercom connected distant wings of the house. 2 elevators moved passengers and freight seamlessly.
Orchards yielded fruit. Everything the estate required, food, timber, income, was intended to be produced on site. Biltmore was designed to be self-sufficient. Yet the financial reality was harsh. Annual operating costs exceeded $250,000, millions in today's currency. George's inheritance and trust funds were immense, but even his wealth was finite. The estate consumed resources faster than they could be replenished. Within a few years, George faced the unrelenting truth. The chateau he had built, magnificent and unparalleled, was economically unsustainable. In 1898, George married Edith Stuyvesant Dresser, 3 years after opening Biltmore. Their daughter, Cornelia, was born in 1900, their only child. A house designed to host dozens of guests and employ 80 staff now sheltered just 3 people. George tried to make the estate profitable. He expanded the dairy operation into a commercial enterprise, sold timber from the managed forests, and experimented with new agricultural practices. None of it generated enough revenue to offset the crushing maintenance costs. The problem was structural, not personal. Biltmore represented the absolute pinnacle of what private wealth could build in America at the end of the 19th century, but the world that had made such feats possible was already shifting. When George built his chateau, vast inherited fortunes faced little taxation. Labor was cheap, abundant, and ununionized. Extreme displays of wealth were socially acceptable, even celebrated, as a natural reward for industrial success. That era was ending. The Panic of 1893 had shaken confidence in unregulated capitalism. Labor unions were organizing, challenging the industrial magnates whose fortunes had funded estates like Biltmore. Progressive politicians were beginning to question whether concentrated wealth served any public good. The pressures for change were mounting, and the window for Biltmore-style ambitions was closing. George's life was cut short in 1914 when he died unexpectedly at 51 following complications from an appendectomy. Edith inherited the estate and immediately faced the financial reality her husband had deferred. Property taxes were rising. Operating costs continued to spiral. The national mood was shifting against ostentatious displays of inherited wealth. Edith made a transformative decision. In 1930, she opened the house and gardens to pay in visitors. Biltmore became both a home and a public attraction. Admission fees helped offset costs. The family continued living in a small private section, but most rooms became exhibits, showcasing the life and luxury of the ultra-wealthy a generation earlier. This adaptation revealed a fundamental truth about Gilded Age mansions. They could not survive as private residences alone. The economic model that had birthed them had collapsed. Preservation required transformation, turning dynastic homes into museums, monuments to a fleeting era of American history. Other Vanderbilt estates followed similar paths. The Breakers in Newport, Marble House, and dozens of other properties eventually opened to the public or were demolished. Dynastic ambitions gave way to cultural stewardship. Biltmore stood at the zenith of American mansion building, the largest, the most expensive, and the last of its kind. nothing comparable would ever be built again, not because Americans lost ambition nor wealth, but because the rules of society and government had changed. By 1913, the very foundation of wealth accumulation had shifted. That year, the 16th Amendment to the Constitution granted Congress permanent authority to levy taxes on income from any source. The era of untaxed fortunes was over. Before 1913, federal income taxes had been temporary and limited. The Civil War had prompted a brief tax, which expired in 1872. Later attempts were struck down by the Supreme Court, which ruled in 1895 that direct taxation without apportionment violated the Constitution. For most of the Gilded Age, America's wealthiest citizens faced no federal income tax whatsoever. They could amass fortunes and spend them freely, constrained only by modest tariffs and excise duties. The 16th Amendment changed everything. Congress enacted the first permanent income tax law in October 1913. Initially, the rates appeared moderate: no tax on income below $3,000, 1% on income between $3,000 and $20,000, and a 7% top rate applied only to income exceeding $500,000, affecting perhaps a few hundred families nationwide. But these rates were only the beginning. World War I demanded unprecedented government revenue. The top rate jumped to 15% in 1916, 67% in 1917, and peaked at 77% in 1918. The threshold for the highest rate fell to $1 million, ensnaring an increasing number of America's elite. For estates like Biltmore, the implications were profound. Vast inherited fortunes could no longer grow unimpeded. The concentrated private wealth that had funded palaces and grand chateaux now faced systematic taxation and public scrutiny. Biltmore was not merely a house, it was the closing chapter of an era in which American ambition could manifest in unrestrained architectural grandeur. George Vanderbilt's chateau, with its forests, farms, and opulent interiors, had been a monument to possibility. By the 1910s, the possibilities were disappearing. The forces that made such a residence feasible, unlimited wealth, cheap labor, and public tolerance for extreme luxury, were gone. Biltmore remained, but the age that created it was over, preserved not as a private home, but as a monument to what had been and what could never be again. By 1918, the scale of federal taxation was staggering. A man earning $2 million that year would surrender more than $1.5 million to the government. The Great War had ended, but high rates remained. Congress eased the top marginal tax slightly, 73% in 1921, 58% in 1922, and 25% by 1925, giving the illusion that fortunes could once again be spent freely. For a brief moment, wealthy families resumed building, entertaining, and displaying their wealth as before. Then the Great Depression struck, erasing that hope forever. The stock market collapsed in October 1929. Banks failed by the thousands. Unemployment surged to 25% nationally and over 30% in industrial centers. Bread lines lengthened, shanty towns multiplied, and public resentment toward the ultra-wealthy intensified. Even President Herbert Hoover, a millionaire in his own right, proposed higher taxes on the rich to fund relief programs. Congress responded with the Revenue Act of 1932, pushing the top marginal rate to 63%. When Franklin D. Roosevelt won the presidency in a landslide that November, he made higher taxation of the wealthy central to his New Deal vision. The Revenue Act of 1935 imposed a 79% rate on income exceeding $5 million annually. Roosevelt dubbed it the wealth tax, framing it as a moral as well as fiscal imperative. He argued that extreme inequality threatened democracy and that progressive taxation was necessary to redistribute wealth fairly. The Supreme Court upheld the new rates, abandoning its prior hostility to income taxation. By 1940, the top rate had climbed to 81%, and during World War II, it soared to 94% on incomes over $200,000. For decades, the richest Americans would see the majority of their earnings absorbed by the government. Income tax was only the first blow. Estate taxes struck when fortunes passed between generations. Congress imposed the first federal estate tax in 1916, starting at 10% for estates over $5 million. By 1924, the rate had risen to 25%. By 1934, 45%, and by 1941, it reached 77%. The effect was brutal. Even fortunes that survived a lifetime of taxation faced decimation when heirs attempted to maintain dynastic estates. Property taxes compounded the problem. State and local governments, desperate for revenue during the Depression, raised assessed values and mill rates. A mansion that had paid a few $1,000s annually in 1913 could face $50,000 or more in the 1930s. The arithmetic was unforgiving. Consider a mansion like Biltmore, whose annual operating costs hovered around $250,000. In 1913, a man with $500,000 income could easily maintain such a home. By 1935, that same income faced federal taxation approaching $400,000. The remaining $100,000 could not cover maintenance, property taxes, and family expenses. Wealthy families experimented with financial strategies to delay the inevitable: trusts, foundations, splitting assets among heirs, and strategic philanthropy. But these measures could only postpone a decline that was structural, not personal. Palaces were no longer sustainable. Labor, too, had changed. The domestic service industry, which had employed millions before World War I, contracted sharply in the 1920s and collapsed during the Depression. Industrial jobs paid better, offered more autonomy, and became socially desirable. Labor laws increased costs and obligations. The Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 introduced minimum wages and maximum hours. State laws mandated workers' compensation. Unions demanded collective bargaining rights. The cheap, abundant labor that had made Gilded Age estates viable was disappearing. Technology offered some relief, but not enough to preserve scale. Central heating replaced coal furnaces. Electric refrigeration eliminated ice delivery. Vacuum cleaners reduced staff time. But a 250-room mansion remained far more expensive to run than a 20-room home. Mechanical ingenuity could not overcome the financial realities. As a result, the wealthy adapted by downsizing. New construction in the 1920s and 1930s favored fewer rooms. Grand but manageable homes of 20 or 30 rooms became the standard for America's elite. A 50-room house was now considered exceptional. The ambition to match Biltmore's 250 rooms was abandoned. Existing Gilded Age mansions became burdens, not symbols. They demanded endless resources, large staffs, and unrelenting attention. Many faced conversion, sale, or partial demolition. The forces reshaping wealth and labor: progressive taxation, estate levies, property assessments, labor shortages, and economic collapse ensured that the era of the ultra-grandiose private estate was over. Biltmore remained a pinnacle of American ambition, a testament to vision, craftsmanship, and unrestrained fortune. But it also stood as a monument to a vanished economic and social world. The scale, luxury, and audacity of the Gilded Age could never again be replicated in an America transformed by taxation, regulation, and evolving societal norms. By the 1930s, the mathematical and social realities were clear. Mansions of Biltmore's magnitude were relics, beautiful but financially untenable. The golden age of private palaces had ended. The ultra-wealthy would continue to exist, but the stage for public displays of power through architecture and landscape had shifted. The Gilded Age dream houses, which once symbolized boundless possibility, were now reminders of limits imposed by economics, law, and a society no longer willing to tolerate unchecked extravagance. Biltmore remained the last word in American private architecture, a masterpiece that history would preserve, but one that no new generation of Americans could replicate. Its story was no longer just about wealth or vision. It had become a lesson in the fragile balance between ambition, resources, and the world around them. By the mid-1930s, Gilded Age mansions were no longer assets. They had become liabilities. Land that had once represented wealth now sat beneath structures whose upkeep devoured fortunes. Property taxes, maintenance costs, and labor expenses transformed once proud palaces into drains on family resources. Wealthy families faced stark choices: maintain the mansion and watch the fortune vanish, or demolish it and reclaim the underlying land. Most chose the latter. The die-off of America's grandest homes was inevitable. Income taxes, estate taxes, and property levies had created an environment where building or sustaining a mega-mansion was financially suicidal. The government had not outlawed palatial residences, it had simply made them impossible to sustain. The tax code solved a political problem. The extreme wealth inequality that had threatened social stability during the Gilded Age was being systematically reduced. Fortunes could still be amassed, but they could no longer be preserved across generations while flaunting extravagant consumption. Society, through its elected representatives, had drawn a line. Concentrations of wealth at Vanderbilt scale were no longer acceptable. The billionaires who survived this transformation did not vanish. They remained astonishingly wealthy by any measure. But the 250-room houses of the previous era were gone from the economic landscape. The question now was practical. If they could no longer live in palaces, what would they do instead? The answer would reshape American elite culture entirely. The demolition began on Fifth Avenue. In 1926, the mansion Cornelius Vanderbilt II had built at the corner of Fifth Avenue and 57th Street was reduced to rubble. Completed in 1883, the house had occupied an entire city block. It contained 130 rooms, a ballroom for 1,200 guests, and interiors crafted by America's finest artisans. For 46 years, the Vanderbilts had inhabited it. In less than 6 months, it was gone, replaced by commercial structures that generated rental income far exceeding the costs of maintaining a private home. The family had made the rational choice. The house consumed wealth. The land beneath it was valuable. Demolition solved both problems. The pattern repeated across Manhattan. William Kissam Vanderbilt's mansion at 665 Fifth Avenue, completed in 1883 at enormous cost, was demolished in 1927. It had been the first French chateau-style house in New York, setting a trend that would dominate elite architecture for decades. 44 years later, it became rubble. Similarly, Caroline Schermerhorn Astor's legendary residence at Fifth Avenue and 65th Street, home of the social queen who defined New York's 400, was leveled in 1926 to make way for luxury apartments. The statistics tell the story. In 1900, more than 100 Gilded Age mansions lined Fifth Avenue between 42nd and 96th Streets. These were palaces, each requiring staffs of 20 to 50 and representing millions of dollars in construction costs and hundreds of thousands in annual upkeep. By 1950, fewer than 10 survived. The rest had been demolished and replaced with hotels, office buildings, or apartment towers, signaling a seismic shift in both architecture and social structure. The wave of destruction extended far beyond Manhattan. Newport, Rhode Island, the summer capital of Gilded Age society, had hosted estates rivaling European palaces. Families occupied these cottages for a few weeks each summer, yet maintained them year-round with full staffs. The Breakers, Cornelius Vanderbilt II's 70-room masterpiece completed in 1895 at $7 million, survived only because the family donated it to the Preservation Society of Newport County in 1948. The gift ensured preservation and provided a tax deduction. The house opened to the public, with admission fees funding its upkeep. Marble House, built by William Kissam Vanderbilt in 1892, followed a similar trajectory, donated in 1963. Other estates, Rosecliff, Chateau-sur-Mer, and more, survived through philanthropy and preservation societies. Where such arrangements were impossible, demolition prevailed. Chicago lost nearly its entire Gilded Age collection. Potter Palmer's castle on Lakeshore Drive, completed in 1885 with 42 rooms and a 3-story art gallery, was razed in 1950. The land beneath it was worth more empty than occupied. The same fate befell estates in San Francisco, Philadelphia, Cleveland, and virtually every major city. Houses built to endure centuries were erased within 2 or 3 generations. The economic logic was inescapable. Annual operating costs for these palaces exceeded what even the wealthiest families could justify. Property taxes added a relentless burden. The underlying land was more valuable repurposed for higher density uses. The result was a profound transformation of urban landscapes. Where one family once commanded an entire city block, apartment buildings now rose, generating rental income from dozens or hundreds of units. Commercial developments replaced single-family mansions. Land that had symbolized private dominance now fueled collective economic productivity.
What emerged was both practical and symbolic. The architecture of private ambition gave way to the architecture of collective utility. Families no longer measured status through square footage or room count. Wealth remained, but its expression had changed. The age of palaces was over. Only by converting estates into museums, schools, or public institutions could families preserve the buildings without bankrupting themselves. Those that could not adapt vanished, leaving only historical records and photographs to testify to the audacity of an era. Biltmore, the Breakers, and a handful of Newport homes survived as exceptions, monuments to vision, craftsmanship, and the fleeting era of extreme private wealth. Every other mansion told the same story: brilliance, ambition, and impermanence. The economics of grandeur had shifted, and the Gilded Age's palaces were no longer sustainable. They became lessons in both history and finance, a reminder that architecture, no matter how monumental, is always subject to the pressures of reality. By the mid-20th century, the American mansion had been transformed from a symbol of limitless private ambition into a historical relic. The real estate market had grown too sophisticated, too lucrative, and too densely populated to tolerate single-family palaces on prime urban land. Office buildings produced far higher returns than sprawling private residences. Hotels and commercial properties converted once elite avenues into engines of profit. The few mansions that survived did so only by entirely reinventing their purpose. The Frick Collection in Manhattan occupies the former home of industrialist Henry Clay Frick. Completed in 1914, the house was designed with eventual museum use in mind. Frick's will provided an endowment to maintain the property as a public art gallery, and it opened in 1935. Today, it remains one of New York City's premier cultural institutions, preserved because its function shifted from residence to museum. Similarly, Andrew Carnegie's 64-room mansion at Fifth Avenue and 91st Street became the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum. Built in 1902 at the northern edge of Fifth Avenue, Carnegie chose the location for its lower cost. The family donated it to the Smithsonian in 1972. Its survival was predicated entirely on its transformation from private residence to public institution. The Morgan Library illustrates the same principle. J.P. Morgan's mansion no longer exists, but his library, constructed in 1906 to house rare books and manuscripts, survives as a museum and research center. The pattern is unmistakable. Residential use guaranteed demolition. Institutional or cultural use ensured preservation. Even Biltmore, the largest and most famous of all American mansions, survived only by opening to tourists in 1930. The Vanderbilt family retained ownership but could no longer occupy the entire 250-room estate. Admission fees covered operating costs that would have been impossible for a private family to sustain. The house became a museum that happened to include a private family wing. A collapsing labor market accelerated the decline. Domestic service had once employed millions, but by the 1930s, the industry had evaporated. Young workers preferred factories, offices, or clerical work over household service. Families who could afford grand houses often could not find the staff to operate them. Technology mitigated the problem partially. Central heating and cooling replaced coal and manual ventilation. Electric refrigeration eliminated ice delivery, and modern appliances reduced cleaning labor. Yet no innovation could make a 100-room house as efficient to operate as a 20-room home. The sheer scale itself was unsustainable. The Great Depression delivered the final blow. Families that once spent fortunes maintaining palaces now faced investment losses, tax burdens, and rising maintenance costs. Some clung to their estates through the 1930s, consuming capital to cover operating losses.
Most concluded that preserving the family fortune mattered more than preserving the family mansion. By 1950, the transformation was complete. The American mansion, as a symbol of the Gilded Age, had become extinct. Those that survived functioned as museums, schools, or institutional buildings. None operated as private residences in the way their builders had intended. Yet the wealthy did not vanish, they simply adapted. The billionaires who remained controlled fortunes that would have astonished even the Vanderbilts. But they had learned that visible displays of wealth invited taxation, regulation, and public scrutiny. The question was not whether they would spend lavishly, but where and how those expenditures would be manifested. Modern billionaires inhabit a world radically different from George Vanderbilt's. Bill Gates lives in Xanadu 2.0, a 66,000-square-foot compound on the shore of Lake Washington. The property spans 5 acres and multiple buildings. Large by any standard, it could accommodate perhaps 40 conventionally divided rooms, but it is not a palace. The design prioritizes technology and privacy over display. Trees screen the estate from public view. The approach is understated. Constructed in the 1990s at an estimated $63 million, it represents a fraction of Gates' net worth, which has exceeded $100 billion at various points. He could have built 10 Biltmores, but he did not. The choice was strategic, not modest. Jeff Bezos follows a similar pattern. His real estate holdings are extensive, spanning a Beverly Hills mansion, New York apartments, a Texas ranch, and a Washington compound. Each property is substantial, yet none approaches palace scale. In aggregate, Bezos possesses more total residential square footage than the Vanderbilts ever did, but it is dispersed and deliberately concealed. Corporate structures, privacy measures, and geographic distribution obscure the full extent of his holdings. Public perception sees fragments, never the whole. Mark Zuckerberg's approach is equally illustrative. His Palo Alto home, purchased in 2011 for $7 million, is modest by billionaire standards, approximately 5,000 square feet. Yet over the following years, he acquired the 4 surrounding properties, expanding the compound to a combined $43 million. The scale is significant, but it is integrated, private, and discreet, designed for functionality, privacy, and control rather than spectacle. The lesson is clear. The era of palatial public display is over. Wealth is no longer measured by the size of a single house or the opulence of a ballroom visible from the street. Today's fortunes are enormous, but their expression is subtler. Technology, privacy, and diversification replace architectural audacity. The modern mansion is designed for the inhabitant's life, not the public gaze. The 250-room palaces of the Gilded Age survive only in history books, films, and the rare preserved museum. Modern billionaires could build them, but they choose not to. The world has changed, and so has the architecture of wealth. The strategy of modern billionaires is not ostentation, it is control. Visibility has been replaced by privacy, and scale by discretion. By acquiring surrounding land, they create a buffer zone that shields their residences from observation. Every acquisition, every structure is deliberate. Unlike the Vanderbilts, whose palaces demanded attention, today's wealth is exercised quietly, defensively. The lesson of the Gilded Age is clear. Building a visible palace creates multiple liabilities. Gates, Bezos, and Zuckerberg understand them instinctively. First, security. Ostentatious mansions advertise their occupants to the world. Kidnappings and extortion became real concerns in the 20th century, crystallized by the Lindbergh baby abduction in 1932. Threats multiplied over time. Political radicals, opportunistic criminals, and mentally unstable individuals fixated on the wealthy. Every public facade increases risk. Modern billionaires prefer invisibility. Trees, topography, and multiple discrete structures replace a single imposing frontage. Privacy is the ultimate design feature. Second, taxation. A 250-room palace draws immediate attention from assessors, triggering enormous property taxes and audits. Fighting valuations consumes resources, time, and energy. Smaller, dispersed properties reduce exposure. Many billionaires reside in states with no income tax or low property taxes, Florida, Texas, Nevada, and Wyoming, which shift the calculus of wealth preservation. Property is no longer a monument. It is a tool for control and efficiency. Third, public relations. Visible mansions provoke criticism. The Occupy Wall Street movement of 2011 demonstrated that ostentatious displays of wealth generate political and social backlash. Media attention, public scrutiny, and populist pressure create liabilities. The display of extreme wealth invites challenges, lawsuits, and public resentment. Modern billionaires mitigate these risks by reducing the visibility of their lifestyle. The response has been a deliberate shift away from single-location residential grandeur toward distributed holdings. The compound strategy exemplifies this philosophy. Instead of one enormous palace, wealthy individuals construct multiple smaller structures across large properties. One building serves as private living quarters, another houses offices, a third accommodates guests, and a fourth contains recreational facilities. The total footprint may rival a Gilded Age mansion, but the architecture is intentionally understated. Function replaces spectacle. Privacy replaces grandeur. Silicon Valley billionaires are particularly adept at this approach. Larry Ellison, founder of Oracle, purchased 1,500 acres on the Hawaiian island of Lanai for $300 million in 2012, controlling an entire island, a feat no Vanderbilt ever achieved. Yet the individual buildings are modest and widely dispersed. The power lies not in the visibility of a palace, but in the control of the landscape itself. Ownership structure amplifies this advantage. Modern billionaires typically hold property through limited liability companies, trusts, and other legal entities that obscure personal connections. Public records may list 123 Property Holdings LLC as the owner, yet connecting that entity to an individual requires painstaking research. Opacity is deliberate, maintained professionally, and designed to protect both privacy and wealth. This strategy is as much about financial engineering as it is about security. A $100 million mansion becomes $100 million subject to estate taxes upon the owner's death. The same capital invested in productive assets, stocks, bonds, private equity, generates returns while growing in value. Strategic estate planning and trusts shield these assets from taxation, multiplying wealth across generations rather than destroying it. Conservation easements extend the benefits further. Landowners like Ted Turner have donated development rights across vast ranches, preserving control while claiming substantial tax deductions. The principle is straightforward. Invest in growth, not consumption. A $500 million palace exemplifies wealth destruction. Construction consumes capital, maintenance drains resources, property taxes continue year after year. Appreciation is slow, unpredictable, and often offset by inflation. Estate taxes consume further wealth at death. The mansion is a machine for depleting fortunes. The same $500 million invested in a diversified portfolio generates steady returns, compounds wealth, and multiplies power. The calculation is no longer about visibility, it is about sustainability, control, and influence. Modern billionaires understand this instinctively. Their homes are comfortable, technologically sophisticated, and substantial, but never ostentatious. Wealth flows into channels that grow assets rather than consume them. Where the Vanderbilts built palaces, today's titans build portfolios, foundations, and dispersed estates. The measure of influence has shifted from rooms to reach, from marble to market control. The legacy of John D. Rockefeller illustrates this shift. His Hudson River estate, Kykwit, cost millions, but the Rockefeller Foundation, built with the same capital, exercises control over billions. The mansion symbolized personal wealth. The foundation wields enduring power. Rockefeller transformed private fortune into public authority, shaping institutions, policy, and culture. This is the model followed today. Strategic philanthropy, investments, and corporate influence replace architectural display. Wealth is exercised invisibly, yet with far greater effect.
The Rockefeller blueprint solves multiple challenges simultaneously. It provides substantial tax deductions, extends influence across generations, and crafts a public image as a philanthropist rather than a monopolist. Foundations, trusts, and corporate holdings allow wealth to operate in ways that mansions never could. Power is no longer tied to a building, it is tied to capital, strategy, and long-term vision. The ultra-wealthy of the 21st century have learned the ultimate lesson of the Gilded Age. Ostentation consumes wealth, but strategic deployment multiplies it. Where George Vanderbilt built Biltmore as a statement of individual achievement, today's billionaires build imperceptible networks of influence. The scale of their fortune surpasses anything the Vanderbilts could have imagined, but its architecture is invisible. Privacy, security, taxation, and influence dictate design. The palace as status symbol has been replaced by discretion as power. Wealth endures, grows, and exerts influence, but quietly, strategically, and far from public view. In the 21st century, the ultra-wealthy have perfected a strategy the Gilded Age could never have imagined. The modern charitable foundation functions as something between a dynastic trust and a global nonprofit. Assets placed inside escape estate taxation entirely. Investment income within the foundation is exempt from federal tax. Grants to qualified charities advance public benefit while simultaneously advancing the founder's priorities. Family members often serve as trustees, wielding control over billions, sometimes for decades or centuries. The scale dwarfs any mansion ever built.
The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation epitomizes this transformation. Its endowment exceeds $50 billion, making it the largest private charitable foundation in the world. Annual grant-making surpasses $5 billion, funding global health initiatives, education reform, and agricultural development across dozens of nations. Its influence touches hundreds of millions of lives through vaccination programs alone. Compare this to a Gilded Age mansion. A palace displays wealth, yes, but its power is symbolic, limited to impressing visitors. The Gates Foundation exercises actual power, shaping policies, directing research, influencing governments, irrespective of where Bill Gates sleeps at night. The Chan-Zuckerberg Initiative takes the model even further. Established in 2015, it is structured as a limited liability company rather than a traditional foundation. This seemingly subtle shift unlocks enormous flexibility. Unlike standard foundations, an LLC can invest in for-profit companies, make political contributions, lobby for policy changes, and operate without public financial disclosure. Zuckerberg pledged to transfer 99% of his Facebook shares, worth over $100 billion at various valuations, to this vehicle. The structure drew criticism precisely because it skirts conventional restrictions, allowing charitable, political, and investment goals to coexist in a single entity. Power, influence, and privacy converge. Jeff Bezos follows a similar pattern. In 2020, he announced the Bezos Earth Fund, committing $10 billion to combat climate change, roughly 8% of his net worth. The pledge, substantial yet strategically minor, grants him outsized influence over global climate policy, environmental organizations, and public narratives about corporate responsibility. The implications are equally striking. Under the highest federal rates, a $10 billion charitable contribution could save roughly $4 billion in taxes. The remaining $6 billion, effectively spent, purchases enormous control over the allocation, oversight, and direction of initiatives worldwide. Meanwhile, the endowment generates returns, funding projects perpetually long after the founder's lifetime.
Media ownership represents another channel of influence unavailable to Gilded Age moguls. Jeff Bezos purchased The Washington Post in 2013 for $250 million, a fraction of his total wealth, trivial compared to the cost of maintaining Biltmore for 2 years. Yet the acquisition grants him influence over one of the most important newspapers in America. Editorial independence remains, but the potential for strategic shaping of public discourse is undeniable. Other billionaires follow the pattern. Laurene Powell Jobs acquired a majority stake in The Atlantic in 2017. Mark Benioff bought Time magazine in 2018. Patrick Soon-Shiong purchased the Los Angeles Times the same year. Each acquisition represents a tiny fraction of total wealth, but provides a platform for shaping narratives, policy, and culture far beyond mere visibility. Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter in 2022 represents the extreme manifestation of this strategy. For roughly $44 billion, Musk gained control over a platform with 400 million users, a primary channel for global political discourse and news. The acquisition required leveraging significant assets and debt, yet the payoff is influence on an unprecedented scale. He controls algorithms determining what users see, moderation policies shaping speech, and features that guide interaction across the platform. No palace could ever deliver that level of power. The mansion impresses. The platform shapes minds, markets, and politics simultaneously. The pattern is unmistakable. Modern billionaires transform wealth into influence that outlasts mere architecture. Foundations, LLCs, media properties, and strategic investments offer control, legacy, and enduring authority that a Gilded Age palace could never achieve. The lesson of Biltmore is inverted. Whereas George Vanderbilt's house represented the pinnacle of wealth displayed, today's billionaires demonstrate that visibility is a liability. Influence is invisible. Privacy amplifies control. Scale is dispersed but exponential. The difference is strategic, not modesty. A modern billionaire might inhabit a 5,000 square foot home in Palo Alto or a 66,000 square foot compound near Seattle, sprawling across multiple structures on 5 acres. The footprint is substantial, yet the design emphasizes privacy, efficiency, and function over spectacle. Security, taxation, and public perception dictate the architecture. Wealth is exercised not through marble, gold, or ornate ceilings, but through capital deployed strategically across sectors, nations, and institutions. The house becomes incidental. Influence becomes essential. In effect, the ultra-wealthy have learned the ultimate lesson of the Gilded Age. Ostentation destroys wealth. Strategic deployment multiplies it. Foundations exert global policy influence. Media ownership shapes culture and discourse. LLCs and investment vehicles convert capital into long-term, multi-generational power. Where Vanderbilt's mansion impressed, today's networks of wealth control. Where a palace could host a dinner for dozens, a foundation shapes the lives of hundreds of millions. The scale is both larger and subtler. The mechanism has changed, but the goal remains the same: enduring control, influence, and legacy.
The mansion, once the ultimate expression of power, has been replaced by strategy, discretion, and functional deployment of capital. In this modern world, the ultra-wealthy do not need to be seen to be powerful. They simply must be positioned correctly. Visibility has become optional. Influence is mandatory. And through these carefully constructed vehicles, billionaires exercise authority across industries, geographies, and generations, achieving far more than any Gilded Age palace ever could. In the 21st century, residential real estate has become less about display and more about control. Platforms, land, and infrastructure now eclipse marble halls and gilded ceilings as instruments of power. Twitter, for instance, is not merely a social network, it is infrastructure. Politicians, journalists, activists, and ordinary citizens depend on it for communication, organization, and influence. Controlling that platform grants power over public discourse itself. Unlike John D. Rockefeller, whose dominance over 90% of American oil refining in the late 19th century operated through market forces and was eventually constrained by antitrust laws, modern platform owners exercise immediate, direct authority. They determine the channels through which billions of interactions occur, the rules governing speech, and the systems through which public opinion forms. Mark Zuckerberg controls Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, platforms with a combined user base exceeding 3 billion. Algorithms dictate what users see, policies shape what they can say, and sophisticated data collection monetizes attention. No king, president, or prime minister exerts comparable influence over so many individuals. Jeff Bezos built Amazon into a platform controlling roughly 40% of American e-commerce. Amazon Web Services underpins large swaths of the internet. Bezos owns the Washington Post and is developing Blue Origin to commercialize access to space. The integration of e-commerce, cloud infrastructure, media, and aerospace forms a vertically integrated empire that even Standard Oil might envy. Political influence flows naturally from this economic dominance. Corporate lobbying and campaign contributions scale to levels previously unimaginable, amplified by the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision in 2010. Wealth can now influence elections, legislation, and public policy directly. The logic is stark. Why erect a $200 million palace that generates no income and exercises no power beyond impressing visitors, when the same capital can fund a foundation shaping global health policy, purchase a media platform influencing public discourse, or acquire a communications network controlling billions of interactions worldwide? To a modern billionaire, the mansion is obsolete. The Vanderbilts built monuments to themselves. Today's ultra-wealthy construct invisible systems of control. The wealth is greater, the influence deeper, the visibility far less. Yet even the most powerful must reside somewhere. The residences of modern billionaires reveal the transformation of American elite culture. Mark Zuckerberg's compound on the Hawaiian island of Kauai illustrates the new model. Beginning in 2014, Zuckerberg and his wife Priscilla Chan purchased approximately 600 acres of land on the island's north shore for more than $100 million. The property includes beaches, forests, and former plantation land. In 2016, construction of a 6-foot wall around portions of the estate sparked controversy, accusations of colonialism, and local outrage. The wall was not ornamental, it was functional, designed to enforce exclusion and prevent observation. Privacy and security, not grandeur, dictate design. The contrast with Biltmore could not be sharper. George Vanderbilt placed his mansion atop a hill, inviting admiration. Zuckerberg conceals his residence behind barriers on a remote island, ensuring that even those nearby cannot casually glimpse it. Larry Ellison has taken the fortress concept to its logical extreme. In 2012, he purchased roughly 98% of the Hawaiian island of Lanai for an estimated $300 million. Spanning approximately 140 square miles, Ellison controls the island itself, a feat unmatched by any 19th-century tycoon. Yet he has built no singular mega mansion. Instead, he developed multiple properties, luxury resorts, agricultural ventures, and conservation projects. On Lanai, the estate is the land, not any one structure. Geographic isolation amplifies security and privacy, rendering woles secondary. Control of arrival, movement, and access replaces ostentation with strategic dominance. Ranch estates reflect the same philosophy. Ted Turner owns approximately 2 million acres across Montana, Nebraska, New Mexico, and other western states. John Malone holds 2.2 million acres, making him the largest private landowner in America. These properties are not lavish showpieces. They are working ranches, generating modest income from cattle, bison, and conservation activities. Residences on these properties remain comparatively modest, often multiple smaller structures rather than a single monumental home. The power resides in controlling vast territories quietly. A billionaire commanding 1 million acres wields authority greater than many European principalities, yet avoids the attention and taxation triggered by a 250-room palace. Conservation easements provide additional benefits. Owners donate development rights to preserve land in perpetuity while capturing substantial tax deductions. Ted Turner has employed this strategy extensively, safeguarding hundreds of thousands of acres while realizing financial advantages worth tens of millions. The land remains under his control, but its future development is restricted, securing both legacy and leverage.
Even darker patterns emerge. Since 2008, doomsday preparation has grown in popularity among tech billionaires. Peter Thiel purchased property in New Zealand and obtained citizenship as a contingency against potential societal collapse in the United States. Other billionaires followed similar strategies, acquiring remote land and constructing fortified shelters. The luxury bunker industry has flourished, converting decommissioned missile silos into secure, subterranean residences. These developments reflect a profound psychological shift. Safety, continuity, and strategic retreat have become as important as public influence. The modern mansion is obsolete. Wealth is no longer best expressed through walls of stone and gilded halls, but through control of infrastructure, media, land, and capital flows. Foundations, media ownership, and strategic land acquisition exercise power invisible to the public, yet far more consequential than any Gilded Age palace. The wealthy now operate in a landscape defined by subtlety, calculation, and permanence. Visibility invites risk. Influence preserves wealth and authority across generations. The transformation is complete. Where George Vanderbilt's Biltmore invited admiration, Zuckerberg hides behind walls. Ellison controls an island. Turner commands millions of acres of working land. Palaces have become liabilities. Modern wealth manifests not through ostentation, but through strategic deployment, invisible architecture, and functional mastery of resources. Influence, privacy, and perpetuity have replaced marble, gold, and ceremonial display. The mansion may still exist. Today, the legacy of Gilded Age ambition endures at the Biltmore estate, not as a private palace, but as a living monument to both history and adaptation. The estate draws roughly 1.4 million visitors annually, who arrive in cars, tour buses, and shuttles, eager to walk through rooms frozen in time. Every corridor, every chamber tells a story. The banquet hall still displays the long table set for Christmas dinner. The library rises 2 stories high, shelves stacked with thousands of books collected by George Vanderbilt himself. The winter garden houses tropical plants beneath glass skylights, a reminder of the delicate precision required to maintain such spaces.
The estate has become what it could never be while George Vanderbilt lived, a public symbol of grandeur, a functioning hub of economic activity, and a window into a vanished era. Admission fees now generate tens of millions annually, creating a sustainable financial model that preserves both the house and its cultural significance. The property has evolved into a full-fledged enterprise, including hotels, restaurants, a winery, retail operations, and guided experiences. Employment exceeds 2,000, making Biltmore one of the largest employers in western North Carolina. The house that once consumed George Vanderbilt's fortune now generates wealth for his descendants while supporting an entire regional economy. The transformation reflects the critical lesson of Gilded Age estates. Grandeur without adaptability is ultimately unsustainable. In contrast, today's ultra-wealthy have abandoned the idea of the single monumental residence entirely. Modern billionaires prioritize invisibility, security, and efficiency. The mansion as a public statement has given way to compounds, bunkers, high-rise anonymity, and sprawling distributed estates. Survivalist bunkers, once the stuff of fringe speculation, have become mainstream among Silicon Valley elites. Equipped with air filtration systems, independent power generation, food storage, and hardened defenses, these structures range from hundreds of thousands to tens of millions in cost. The underlying psychology contrasts sharply with Vanderbilt's optimism. While he built Biltmore to signal confidence and permanence, the modern bunker is an insurance policy against societal collapse. The shift traces a progression from ostentation to fortification to paranoia. Urban anonymity provides another strategy. Hedge fund titan Ken Griffin has acquired multiple floors in Chicago's tallest residential buildings, favoring vertical luxury over a single mansion. High-rise living ensures security through controlled access, professional management, and the inconspicuousness of blending in among other wealthy residents. Griffin's strategy also illustrates modern tax pragmatism. In 2021, he relocated Citadel's headquarters from Chicago to Miami, citing concerns about crime and taxation. Florida offers no state income tax, lower property taxes, and a business-friendly climate, an ideal setting for maximizing wealth efficiency. Corporate campuses have emerged as a unique iteration of the modern estate. Google, Facebook, and Apple provide integrated campuses with offices, residential facilities, restaurants, gyms, and medical services. For executives, the campus merges work, residence, and security, mimicking the self-contained nature of Gilded Age estates, but without the visibility or tax burden of a palace. Larry Page and Sergey Brin, for example, spent decades living and working on Google's campus, while Mark Zuckerberg's Palo Alto home lies minutes from Facebook headquarters, blurring the line between home and office. The campus model offers privacy, operational efficiency, and community, while remaining hidden from the public eye. Jeff Bezos's West Texas Blue Origin facility takes this model to its extreme. Sprawling across hundreds of thousands of acres in a remote desert, it combines commercial aerospace operations with private residential space. Here, personal retreat and professional ambition coexist seamlessly, insulated from scrutiny and distraction. Across these varied strategies, certain principles remain constant: privacy over display, security over visibility, and efficiency over ostentation. Modern billionaires maintain enormous resources, yet deliberately conceal them from public view, in stark contrast to the Gilded Age's theatrical wealth displays. The mansion as a symbol of permanence and confidence has been replaced by networks of compounds, ranches, bunkers, high-rise residences, and corporate integrated living spaces. These structures reflect a new psychology: strategic preservation of wealth rather than performative extravagance. The ultra-wealthy still wield influence, but it is subtle, systemic, and largely invisible. Where Vanderbilt built for admiration and legacy, today's billionaires build for control, resilience, and long-term power. This evolution raises profound questions. Gilded Age mansions offended democratic sensibilities and consumed vast resources in pursuit of display, but at least their presence was tangible. Everyone could see who possessed such wealth. Today, multi-billion-dollar estates, offshore holdings, and opaque corporate structures hide wealth, influence, and even political power from public view. Tax assessors struggle to evaluate assets hidden behind LLCs. Historians struggle to record the physical traces of contemporary power. Modern wealth is pervasive, yet largely invisible, operating silently across sectors, continents, and digital platforms.
Biltmore, by contrast, stands as a rare exception. Its survival was contingent on adaptability. In 1930, long before tourism became a mainstream industry, the Vanderbilt family opened the estate to the public. Admission fees, once unimaginable as a primary revenue source, became the lifeline sustaining the property. The estate transformed from a family residence into a profitable enterprise and cultural institution. Without this foresight, Biltmore would have joined the ranks of demolished mansions across Fifth Avenue and Newport. The lessons of Biltmore are clear. Private residential use alone cannot sustain palaces of that scale. Only by transforming into museums, tourist attractions, or institutional facilities can such structures endure. Today, visitors experience the estate as both a historical narrative and an economic ecosystem. They walk through rooms preserved exactly as George Vanderbilt left them, witness the craftsmanship of the Gilded Age, and witness a once private world adapted into a public enterprise. Biltmore demonstrates a rare alignment of preservation, economic viability, and cultural significance. Admission revenue supports ongoing operations, employment, and community development, illustrating that historical monuments can thrive when integrated with practical business models. Where Gilded Age mansions once symbolized the unchecked power of individual wealth, Biltmore now symbolizes adaptability, foresight, and the careful balancing of legacy and utility. It remains the single surviving testament to an era of ambition, a monument that has endured by learning to survive. In the final analysis, the contrast could not be more stark. Vanderbilt's vision endured, not as a fortress or bunker, but as a public institution. Modern billionaires, by contrast, prioritize invisibility, strategic control, and influence over ostentation. Biltmore's continued relevance and prosperity highlight the enduring lesson: wealth may build mansions, but only adaptability preserves them. Today, Biltmore operates as a cultural and economic engine, while contemporary compounds, bunkers, and estates remain hidden fortresses, exercising invisible power in a world where visibility can be costly and permanence uncertain.
Visiting Biltmore today is a journey through time, a rare window into a vanished world of wealth, craftsmanship, and ambition. Tourists wander through corridors that once welcomed only family, guests, and a retinue of servants. They photograph rooms never meant for public eyes, examining furnishings, artwork, and architectural details designed for private enjoyment. For $75, any visitor can walk the halls that George Vanderbilt envisioned as a fortress of permanence, spaces meant to reflect status and taste rather than generate revenue. The experience is both immersive and humbling. The scale astonishes. Ceilings rise impossibly high. Rooms stretch across vast expanses. Public spaces dwarf any modern home, leaving contemporary luxury constructions in comparative humility. Modern estates may feature high-tech amenities and rare materials, but they rarely approach the monumental proportions that defined Gilded Age design. Walking from the library to the banquet hall requires minutes, if not hours. The distances between rooms and the sheer volume of space are themselves statements of power and permanence. Technology and labor costs alone make replication impossible today, even for billionaires who could theoretically afford the expense. Craftsmanship at Biltmore remains unmatched, stone carving, ornamental woodwork, hand-applied plaster, intricate ironwork, each element speaks to generations of artisans, trained through long apprenticeships in specialized trades that no longer exist at scale. Modern construction methods, labor structures, and building codes make reproducing such work prohibitively expensive, even if one could gather the same skill set. In preserving Biltmore, America preserves not just a building, but a vanished culture of craft and technique, a physical archive of human skill and ambition. Yet preservation comes at a cost. Biltmore is frozen in 1895, maintained as a museum rather than a living home. Descendants occupy a small section, largely invisible to visitors. The estate no longer functions as a family residence. It has become a curated public experience. This transformation ensured survival, but also eliminated its original purpose, a home designed for generations of Vanderbilts, a domestic world intertwined with social and cultural influence. Its survival is remarkable, but it is also the exception. The majority of Gilded Age.
Mansions, hundreds of them, have vanished entirely. Fifth Avenue's Vanderbilt palaces, Potter Palmer's Chicago residence, countless Newport cottages and San Francisco estates lost to earthquake and redevelopment are gone. Preservation often required institutional intervention, conversion to museums, or philanthropic donation. Without these measures, the vast majority of America's architectural heritage would have disappeared completely. The loss extends beyond brick, stone, and timber. The Gilded Age produced a unique approach to wealth, one invested in permanence, physical grandeur, and the creation of enduring cultural artifacts. Mansions were monuments, not merely homes. They expressed confidence in a fortune's permanence, a willingness to anchor wealth in tangible form, and an aesthetic philosophy that prized physical legacy over financial return. Modern billionaires take a very different approach. Wealth now flows into foundations, media properties, technological platforms, and diversified investment portfolios. These instruments generate returns, amplify influence, and shape society in ways buildings cannot, but they leave little trace visible to the public or future historians. A foundation can affect global health policy. A tech platform can control the flow of information, yet these powers leave no architectural footprint, no halls to tour, no ceilings to marvel at. The transition from palaces to portfolios reflects a broader societal shift. Progressive taxation in the early 20th century reshaped the calculus of wealth. High estate, income, and property taxes made sustaining monumental estates economically impossible. Revenue from these taxes funded highways, schools, hospitals, and public programs, generating tangible public benefits that dwarfed the contributions of any single family mansion. Gilded Age inequality was glaring and visible. Modern inequality is diffuse and concealed. The concentration of wealth today exceeds levels seen in the Vanderbilts' time, yet it is harder to perceive, harder to challenge, and harder to regulate. Whereas Ida Tarbell could investigate Standard Oil and labor unions could organize against industrialists whose palaces broadcasted their power, the modern ultra-wealthy operate behind layers of corporate structures, LLCs, offshore holdings, and philanthropic entities that obscure ownership and influence. Visibility has practical implications. When wealth and power are transparent, democratic societies can respond. Voters demand taxation, legislators enact regulation, journalists investigate abuses. When concentrated wealth is invisible, accountability diminishes. How does one evaluate a foundation's influence on public health policy? How does one regulate a social media platform that shapes billions of interactions daily? How does one tax assets spread across hundreds of legal entities and multiple jurisdictions? Modern billionaires have solved the very problem that destroyed Gilded Age mansions. They have made their wealth and influence difficult to perceive while retaining maximum control. Biltmore, in contrast, exists as a tangible, comprehensible testament.
Visitors witness both the opulence and the consequences of extreme wealth. The mansion tells a story of ambition, ingenuity, and adaptation, how one estate survived when countless others were demolished. It demonstrates the interplay of wealth, labor, and cultural legacy. Yet it also highlights what has been lost, a physical record of craft, a visible representation of concentrated power, and a means for the public to gauge and respond to social inequality. In the final reckoning, Biltmore embodies duality. It is a monument to the Gilded Age, preserved against time, labor, and economic logic. It is also a cautionary tale, a reminder that wealth alone cannot guarantee permanence without adaptation. Modern billionaires, conversely, wield unprecedented influence through structures invisible to the eye. They shape global health, media narratives, financial markets, and political outcomes without leaving behind grand palaces or public records of their power. The lessons are profound. The mansion as a tool of power has disappeared, replaced by dispersed, largely intangible forms of influence. Wealth persists, influence endures, but visibility, the defining characteristic of the Gilded Age, is gone. The central question remains unresolved. Biltmore demonstrates that legacy can survive through adaptation, yet the contemporary billionaire system raises new challenges.
Power is concentrated, obscured, and unaccountable in ways that history's monuments once made evident. The world has traded visible opulence for invisible influence. Biltmore offers insight into what was, what survives, and what is forever lost, an architectural window into the dynamics of wealth, society, and human ambition. Is modern invisibility preferable to the Gilded Age ostentation? The answer depends on the lens through which one views wealth. If the concern is efficiency, the modern approach is undeniably superior. Today's billionaires invest in productive assets rather than constructing 250-room palaces that consume fortunes. Capital flows into businesses, technology, research, and ventures that generate returns for both owners and society, far more rational than pouring millions into marble halls and gilded ceilings. The world benefits when wealth fuels innovation rather than indulgence. Yet, if the concern is inequality, the comparison becomes far less flattering. Concentration of wealth has intensified. The ultra-wealthy control a larger share of global assets than the Vanderbilts, Morgans, or Rockefellers ever did. The tax mechanisms that once destroyed mansions, enforcing accountability and redistributing resources, have been steadily weakened. Top marginal rates have fallen from 94% to 37%, and estate taxes have been reduced dramatically. The financial and political pressures that forced Biltmore's transformation into a museum no longer exist at the same scale. Modern billionaires retain far more freedom, making the invisible consolidation of power both easier and more entrenched. Accountability itself suffers under this invisibility. Foundations, platforms, and media properties now operate as instruments of influence, shaping education, health, environmental policy, and public discourse with little oversight. Foundations persist for generations with minimal transparency. Social media platforms and digital ecosystems control the flow of information, shaping public opinion in ways no palace ever could. Power today is deeper, more pervasive, and almost imperceptible, a sharp contrast to the visible, tangible dominance of the Gilded Age elite. Biltmore, in contrast, embodies the full spectrum of wealth's legacy. It is beautiful and impractical, wasteful and impressive, offensive and culturally invaluable all at once. The mansion demonstrates what extreme wealth can achieve when invested in craft, architecture, and enduring aesthetic value. Visitors can trace every carved stone, every hand-forged detail, every gilded cornice, a level of artistry rarely seen today. Yet Biltmore also proves the limits of ostentation.
George Vanderbilt's dream survived not because the house was maintained as a private residence, but because it adapted, transforming into a commercial enterprise accessible to the public. Its endurance is a story of evolution, not preservation of intent. The lesson transcends architecture.
The Gilded Age forced wealth into physical monuments. Modern billionaires are forced to evolve differently, driven by taxation, public scrutiny, and globalized economies. Their wealth now flows strategically, invisibly, and politically, exerting influence without drawing attention. It is more rational, more powerful, more adaptable, but also less accountable, less visible, and harder for society to challenge. Standing on Biltmore's terrace, gazing across the Blue Ridge Mountains that George Vanderbilt once surveyed, the perspective is humbling. The forests have matured, the winding approach road threads through century-old trees, and the vista stretches for miles, timeless, yet a testament to adaptation. The mansion survives because it transformed. The fortune that created it dispersed. The world that enabled such construction ended, and nothing comparable will rise again, not for lack of ambition, but because the incentives have fundamentally changed. Whether future generations will tour museums of foundations, examine archives of defunct platforms, or explore the remnants of media empires remains uncertain. These new monuments of influence may wield power far exceeding Biltmore's, yet they will leave little for the public to behold.